Museo Casa de Leon Trotsky. He was assassinated right here in Mexico City. In this house, in this room, at this desk. Welcome back, everyone. Mexico City. We are back here in Mexico City, and today we're going to be visiting a very interesting place, and that is right here, the Museo Casa de Leon Trotsky. It's Leon Trotsky's house. We're going to Trotsky's house. Why are we going to Trotsky's house? Trotsky, the famous Russian revolutionary, who famously died here in Mexico City. That's why we're going to his house, actually. He was assassinated right here in Mexico City, right here inside this house that is now a museum. And today we're going to see it, so come along. Thanks for clicking on the video. If you want to help out the channel and help it grow, I really would appreciate it. Click on the like button down there, the subscribe button, and the little bell next to it to be notified for when new videos drop. It really helps the channel grow because it's going to help the YouTube algorithm recognize this content and spread it to other YouTube viewers. If you'd like to support the channel monetarily, I would appreciate that as well. You can leave a super thanks by clicking this thanks button here and give a small donation to the channel. I appreciate your support. So back to the video, enjoy. So Leon Trotsky. Leon Trotsky, member of the Bolshevik Party, revolutionary, leading member of the party of Bolsheviks who overthrew the government in Russia in 1917 in the Russian Revolution, and one of the leading figures in the communist government that took over. Now, Trotsky arguably was not a very good dude. There was, in the wake of the Russian Revolution, a lot of violence. The Russian Revolution, the result of a civil war in Russia, but that civil war really continued afterwards with the Red Terror, which is a wave of very violent political persecution in which the Bolsheviks basically put down any political opposition to them very violently, with assassinations, executions, imprisonment, and Trotsky was right there for it. In fact, he was one of the architects of the Red Terror. So it's important to note that Trotsky himself, while he was ultimately exiled for his opposition to Joseph Stalin after Lenin's death in 1924, Stalin took power and exiled Trotsky because Trotsky was further left than Lenin and created essentially a leftist movement to oppose Stalin. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Trotsky was a good guy just because he was opposing Stalin. But it's interesting to note that Trotsky, after being exiled, went to a bunch of different places, not just Mexico. He was in France, he was in Turkey, he was in Norway, and eventually he ended up here in Mexico for the last maybe like year and a half of his life here. And at this point, he had already been subject to a number of assassination attempts. So he knew that his time was potentially coming to an end. Not just because of the assassination attempts, but also because of health problems. He had very high blood pressure. He was afraid that he was going to suffer a cerebral hemorrhage and die that way. And by the time of his death, he was already sort of like wrapping up his affairs, writing. He was a prolific writer, and he was writing some of the last works of like his life. But right around the corner at the Museo Casa Trotsky is the room, of course, where Trotsky was assassinated. He was assassinated by a guy named Ramon Mercader, and that guy was an NKVD agent, Stalin's secret police, who actually lived in Mexico City for months and months, tracking Trotsky, tracking his movements. And eventually, he was able to gain access to the house while Trotsky was working in like a study, and hit him in the head with an ice axe. Now, Trotsky didn't actually die immediately. The ice axe penetrated his skull and went into his brain, but he was still alive, and he managed to call out for his guards, his security, who were able to subdue Mercader. And Trotsky actually lived for like another day in the hospital until he passed away afterwards. But that's just a short history of Trotsky. Let's head back around the corner and we'll check out the house. It'd be really interesting to see not just the house preserved, but I also think there is a museum with a lot of information, photographs and things like that, artifacts about Trotsky and his life, especially his life here in Mexico City. So we went back around to the front of the Museo Casa de Trotsky and entered in, paid a small fee of about 80 or 100 pesos, which ends up being about $4 or $5 US. Now, we were told that we weren't allowed to film in here using a camera, but we were allowed to take pictures and film using a cell phone, so we were able to do that. First, here in the main hall, there's a bust of Trotsky here that you can see. And next to that, there were these interesting photos of Trotsky throughout his lifetime, like different ages of Trotsky. And you can see from the photos, he is a very distinctive-looking individual. Once you know what Leon Trotsky looks like, with the hair and the glasses and the beard, it's kind of hard to forget his face, that's for sure. Here there were also some historical photographs of Trotsky, sort of, some of them once he was in Mexico. And of course, being in Mexico City here was the last year and a half of his life, so he was quite old at the time. But a picture here with Diego Rivera, the famous Mexican muralist and also member of the Mexican Communist Party. And here a picture of Trotsky arriving actually in Mexico City at the airport with his wife, Natalia Sedova. Behind them you can see that they're military. These were guards that were provided for them by Mexican President Lázaro Cárdenas. And here a picture of Trotsky with members of the Mexican Communist Party, including on the far left of the picture, Diego Rivera, who we previously mentioned, and also Frida Kahlo, famous Mexican artist and Diego Rivera's wife. Here, some of Natalia's personal items, including clothing, gloves, her official papers with her passport photo. Very interesting to see some of these personal items. The next section were photographs of actually sort of explaining and showing the assassination. Here, the study, a picture of the study in which he was assassinated, or the assassination attempt occurred. Because as I mentioned, he didn't actually die right away. He was in the hospital, as you can see in this picture here, for about 24 hours or so after the attempt, when he passed away in the hospital. Picture here of Trotsky in the hospital. And of course, being a very popular figure within the communist movement, there was a large funeral procession for him here in Mexico City after his death. You can see pictures of the funeral procession here. This photo is of Ramon Mercader's police identification file, his fingerprints and photos of him after he was apprehended by the police. Here you can see police at like a press conference or a photo opportunity showing off the actual ice axe, the weapon that Mercader used in the assassination. Now, interestingly, that ice axe is still preserved. It is not here in Mexico City, but it's actually in the United States. It is preserved in the National Spy Museum in the United States. And they had here a long timeline throughout the center of this large room that showed from all the way back in the Russian Revolution starting in 1917, the timeline going all the way up through the decades. Eventually to the end here with the fall of the Soviet Union all the way up in 1991. So a full timeline of the Soviet Union from the Russian Revolution until the end. Here are some representations of Trotsky in both artwork, also in like magazine covers, and what looks to me to be like advertisements for speaking engagements and things that Trotsky participated in while he was here in Mexico City. Some of Trotsky's actual personal possessions here, including like a journal or contact book where he had, like a black book for contacts. This, a Spanish to Russian dictionary, because of course he would need to have learned Spanish to live here. And here, his famous spectacles, the glasses that you see him wearing in all of the photos. Here, an old rifle of one of Trotsky's guards. Now, Trotsky, of course, after several assassination attempts, had a number of guards who were in charge of his protection during his stay here in Mexico City. They also have some spent and unspent cartridges here, rifle cartridges. And also here, very interestingly, a picture of the house as it was at the time of Trotsky's death. Now, in the city where we are here, in this part of the city, it's much more built up. But at the time, this part of the city was not as built up, and this is what the building looked like at the time. It looks very different today, although when you walk in through the museum and see the actual building, which we'll be doing in just a moment here, you can see that they've preserved the house itself in the back part of the museum. And here we can actually walk through this little passageway here. And along the way, there's some more interesting artifacts and information about Trotsky. But on the way back into this like little courtyard area here, you can see the actual house, the house itself. And it's really like two buildings. There is the house where Trotsky lived, but also the guard house that you can see here. The guardhouse where, like I mentioned, he had several bodyguards who lived here in this compound full-time along with Trotsky and his family. Now, the guardhouse itself has been transformed into this exhibit here of really about Trotsky, the other members of his leftist group, and also his family. You can see lots of pictures here within this hall. Here you can actually see a newspaper article. It says here, Lenin's general staff, Stalin, the executioner alone remains. Now this is including Trotsky, and all of these are members of Lenin's general staff during the revolution. And after Stalin took over, he had all of them either executed or disappeared until he was the only one remaining and in power. He basically stamped out any threat to his rule in a series of purges of political opposition. In here, though, there are photos of Trotsky along with the other members of Lenin's general staff during the revolutionary era. There's pictures here. You can actually see Lenin in this large picture in the center making a speech before his death. A number of other pictures here as well with Trotsky, with other revolutionary figures. This is, of course, a few decades before his death here when he was much younger. You can see in the photos how young he looks. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, this was the last place where Trotsky was hiding out here in Mexico City. He had actually fled after being exiled to a number of different places. And you can see here from the map all of those different places, including Turkey, France, Norway, eventually ending up here in Mexico City. Here they have a photo of the house where Trotsky was staying when he was exiled in Turkey. Also here, a picture of the house where he was exiled when he was staying in France. And of course, he had to continuously move from country to country because of repeated assassination attempts. And it wasn't just Trotsky who was subject to assassination attempts and political reprisals. This is a family tree of Leon Trotsky, the great majority of whom were either killed or disappeared by Stalin. And in fact, I believe there was only one or two descendants of Trotsky who ended up surviving the Great Purges and ended up living in the United States. And from the guard's house here, we move on to the actual house, Casa Habitación Leon Trotsky. Here in this sign, just to summarize some information about the house itself, when it was built, and how Trotsky eventually came to live here, and a small blurb about like what his life was like while he was here, and information about each of the different rooms in the house. And we can see each one of these rooms they've meticulously preserved so that they look as they were when Trotsky was living here with his family. He lived here along with his wife, Natalia, and also their grandson also lived here in the house. So let's head inside and we can take a look at all the rooms preserved here in the house. Now, the first room you enter into is the office. And this is not actually the study or office where Trotsky was assassinated. We can save that room for last. This room here, the office, was where Trotsky's like aides and secretaries worked. His wife also worked in this office sometimes. It's sort of like a library study. The next room here is the dining room. And they have the dining room preserved, as you can see here, including the table where the family would have eaten meals. Next to the dining room here is the kitchen. And the kitchen, of course, preserved as well. I really always like seeing historically preserved kitchens. I think it's very, very interesting to see because the kitchen is really like the heart of the house. And it's very interesting to see where meals would have been preserved in historical houses. Here, a look at the bathroom of the house. As well, the next room, his grandson's room. And like I mentioned, Trotsky's grandson lived with him. And this room here was Natalia's room, where she slept, and the desk here, where she would have worked. Next to these rooms was the closet, and you can see they've preserved some of the clothing, Trotsky and Natalia's clothing here in the closet. Very interesting. And of course, last but not least, is Trotsky's study. Now, the study here, it's very interesting because you can see as we pan across the desk where he was actually seated during the assassination, you can see a bed in the corner. Now, this bed was where Trotsky would sleep most of his nights because he was working so feverishly on writings that he was doing at the desk that he often would not make it back to the bedroom. He would just sleep here in this bed in the corner. But a truly historic place here, the actual room where Leon Trotsky was assassinated, and here, the desk where he was sitting when Ramon Mercader entered the house and hit him in the back of the head with the ice axe. It's kind of dark to think about, but it's an extremely important historic event, and it happened right here in Mexico City, in this house, in this room, at this desk. But that's really about it for the Casa de Trotsky. We've seen all the rooms, the exhibits in the museum, and we can end it here looking out into the courtyard from the house. This is the courtyard that Trotsky would have seen, that Trotsky would have looked out onto from his house here before he was assassinated. That really was quite the experience, I'm not going to lie. I had been excited to see, darkly excited, I guess, to see that house because I knew it was here. I knew that Trotsky was assassinated here in Mexico City. And when I decided that I was going to come here to Mexico City, it was one of the places that I kind of wanted to find. I had assumed that they would have made it as a preserved monument and made it into a museum, which they did. and to be able to see the whole house, the exhibit with the photos and the artifacts, but also like the actual table where he was sitting when he got the mountain or the ice axe in the back of the head. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy to see that, and to see just the whole house and get a look at what it was like in that house when he was living here back in like the late 30s and like into 1940. So it's very interesting. One of the really interesting things about it is this neighborhood. Trotsky, you know, was a far leftist communist. I mean, further left than Stalin. Like he opposed Stalin because he thought that Stalin's regime was like too centralized and there was too much power in the hands of the government, and the workers and the people didn't have enough power. And so he was like a true communist revolutionary. And yet this neighborhood that we're in right now is one of the like more wealthy neighborhoods in Mexico City. In fact, like right down the street, maybe like 5 or 6 blocks away from the house, the museum is probably one of the most expensive malls in like all of Mexico City, where there's like a Chanel and a Louis Vuitton, and it's very crazy. It's crazy how things change over the decades. But anyway, that was very interesting. It was a very interesting visit, and I'm really glad that we did it. This is one of the last videos that we're going to be making from here in Mexico City, and so I'm glad that we got a chance to go and see that. There's going to be more coming, like maybe 1 or 2 more videos from here in Mexico City, but after that, we're going to be moving on. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.